Thank you for joining us for Working Through the Word, a ministry of the Richmond Church of Christ. Let's join our pulpit minister, Mike Johnson, as he brings today's lesson.
Everything that you do, the person that you are, the way we conduct ourselves, is because somebody influenced us to be that way. We can't get away from influence. Our whole lives have been about being influenced one way or another by people. Some of those things we adapt or adopt to ourselves, and they become a part of us, and therefore we are who we are because they influenced us to be that way. And other things we look at and say, not for me, I'm not going to have that, and they become an influence that says, I'm not going to do certain things. But no matter how we look at it, it's not possible for any one of us to get away from being influenced by others. Now tonight, we're going to consider the other side of that. And that is that we cannot keep away from being influencers because somebody's watching, somebody's listening, and we need to be aware. But for this moment, I want you to think with me about being influenced. Now, we're all going to be, but the challenge, of course, is to ask the question, how am I being influenced? What is it that is influencing me? And the real question for today is to ask, what do I need to do in order to be influenced properly? What can I do to ensure that I am following a good path of influence? Think with me about these thoughts for a few minutes today. First of all, the entire Bible is filled with accounts of influence. From the very beginning text of Scripture all the way to the end, the Bible talks about people who were influenced by others. And because of that, we have thoughts about those people. For instance, when you think of Adam, what do you think about? What goes to your mind when you think of Adam? Adam was created by God as the first living human, and God brought him a wife made from his own body. And one day, we don't know when, but one day she was tempted by a serpent to eat a fruit that God had forbidden. And immediately she turned to him and she said, as the text reads, to her husband who was with her. And he took and he ate. He was influenced by Eve. She convinced him to do something. Yes, she was influenced by the serpent. But when you think of Adam, do you think of a man who is tainted by the effects of that influencing in his life? Do you think of a man who did not stand up and become the man that God wanted him to be because he allowed influence to take him away from that? What do you think of when you think of Adam? Later in the book of Genesis, Joseph comes along. He has older brothers that don't like him very much because God is talking to them through him. And he's getting visions from the Lord, and he's telling his brothers about it. One day, Dad sends him off to take some stuff to the boys who were out taking care of the sheep. And they saw him coming. And they said, let's kill him. Reuben said, no, let's don't do that. Let's put him in a pit. And later he thought he would come and take him out of the pit and get him home. But while Reuben was not around, Judah said to his brothers, look, there's coming a caravan going into Egypt. Why don't we sell him to them and make up a story that he's been killed? When you think of the brothers of Joseph, what's their reputation? Who are they? Oh, I know they were the heads of the tribes of Israel, but when you know that story and that influence and how they allowed it to influence them, what do you now think of them? Probably not as good as you might. Naaman is a commander of an army. Powerful man. He has leprosy, an incurable disease. There's a young slave girl in his house who had been taken slave from the people of God. And she said, oh, that my master were in Judea. There is a man who can cure your disease. So we ran down there quickly in his chariot, and eventually he came to Elisha, who said, yeah, go dunk yourself 7 times in the Jordan River and you're going to be clean. And he rebelled. That's a stinking, nasty river. We have better rivers back home. And he was heading back home, and his slave driving the chariot said, it's such an easy thing to do. Why don't you just do it? And he went to the Jordan River and dunked himself 7 times. And he was made whole. What do you think about those 2 slaves? Ripped from their homes, and yet held to some principles. And now Naaman, who was involved in taking them from their homes, what do you think of him now? When he listened, and he was healed, and he became someone conscious of the eternal God. What do you think about him now? Jesus came on the scene. And one day, Andrew encountered him. And in listening to him and in talking to him, he was inspired. We found the Messiah. And he ran to get his brother Peter. You got to come see this guy. I think he's the Messiah. Peter could have been like many others who couldn't believe that could happen. But instead, he came with Andrew, and he became Peter the Apostle, the first gospel preacher. Now, what do you think about Peter? We are influenced by so many people, by so many things, by so many opportunities. And the way that we are influenced and what we become develops a reputation that we carry with us. I am, to a great extent, what I have been influenced by others to be. And you and I have a reputation We have a name that is built upon how we have been influenced. It might be a reputation like Adam had, or like Joseph's brothers had when the influence is poor. Or it just might be that our reputation could be like Naaman, who allowed slaves to convince him of something good. Or Peter, who listened to his brother. And now their reputations are much better. I have no doubt that every single person gathered in this room and anybody who's online with us, I have no doubt that we want to have a good reputation. We want to be known for people who are doing what is right. We want to be influenced properly. I want to give you 3 words. 3 words that translate 3 Greek words in the New Testament that tell us how to be influenced properly in this process. Tonight there are 3 other Greek words that we will use to talk about how to be influencers. But today, if you want to make sure that you're being influenced properly, if you want to know that the influence that is taking effect in your life is proper and heading in a good direction, let me give you these 3 words to follow. All of them translating these meanings in Scripture. Number 1 is the word mimic. Mimic. I want us to know that part of what we do in the process of being influenced properly, we begin with mimicking or copying. How many times have you seen someone come in maybe to the time of worship and they have a baby? And maybe the baby's in a carrier. How many people do you see stop and look down in the carrier and try to get that little baby to notice them? And we try to get them to smile. And we say, "Oh, you want to talk to me, don't you?" Maybe you don't understand what I'm talking about because that's what I do all the time. Maybe you don't. But that's how we do things. We look at those little children and we want to, and we think, "Oh boy, I'm smiling and they're smiling because they like me." You know what they're doing? They're mimicking. They're copying. Because that's exactly how things begin. You start by copying, and as a child, they're watching and they're seeing and they're saying, "I want to do that," and so they just watch. If you're being influenced properly, then you have people that you're watching. That's okay. Paul said of himself twice in 1 Corinthians 4 and 16 and 11 and 1, "Imitate me." Now that's not arrogant. It's not arrogant because he said, "Only as I follow Christ." Because when we have people that we're watching, when we have people that we are mimicking, we need to make sure that first they are watching and they are mimicking the Lord. But just like a child learns to do things by mimicking and copying, have some people that you watch, that you copy, and they will influence you well. Whole groups can have people to copy. The Thessalonians were told by Paul, the churches of God in Judea are watching you. 1 Thessalonians 2:7. We need to be, as a church, it's okay for us to be noticing and watching and mimicking some things that we see in other groups, because it helps us to be influenced well. We need to be people who are able to say, I have someone that I'm following. And I'm watching. And I'm mimicking. Because that's a good person. That's a good group. And I want to be influenced. The obvious question that then comes to all of us is the question that says, okay, who am I watching? Who are you watching? There's even a challenge in Hebrews 13 and verse 7 where the writer says, obey those that have the rule over you and watch out for your souls. Those are the shepherds of a local congregation. And he says, follow their faith. It's okay to have people that we mimic and people that we copy who are doing the same to Jesus. So what about you and me? Who are we copying in our speech patterns? Who are we copying in our dress patterns? Who are we copying in our activities away from here? Because if I'm not copying the right people, I can't be influenced properly. Number 2 is the word trace. Trace. Now, all of these words have a generic translation in Scripture, often by the word example. So you have a child who is going to learn to write. And you see those pages that have the dotted form of letters. And you hand the child a pen or a pencil or a crayon, and you say, I want you to follow the pattern. And so they put it on there, and they follow the dotted lines. So they learn to make their ABCs by tracing over something that's already been put there. That's how they learn. Because once they've been watching and mimicking, now it's time for them to practice on their own. That's how children grow. If you're wanting to be influenced properly, it's time now to practice what you've been watching somebody else do. It's time to trace over the text or the thing that they've already set so that you can learn to do it on your own. I think that's the meaning behind the word that Peter used in 1 Peter chapter 2 when he said that Jesus has left us an example that we should follow in his steps. He's left us the dotted line. And all he wants us to do is walk exactly the way he walked. And in so doing, I'm practicing what I have seen in those others, and I'm following the trace that Jesus has set. And when I do that, I'm on a right path and a good process toward proper influence. The third and final word is the word imprint. Imprint. Probably today, somebody will look at some child and say, you look just like your mom. You look just like your dad. And maybe you will be like me. You ever been sitting around and in the sort of unconscious, just relaxing moments, you look at yourself and you go, oh my, I'm looking just like my dad used to look. I'm doing exactly the same he did. I saw it all my life, and now look, I'm just doing it. It's not like I'm going, okay, I want to do it this way because Dad did it. It just has been imprinted. It's the same word used when Thomas said, I want to see the print of the nails in Jesus' hands and feet. If I have found someone to mimic and copy, and then I've been tracing what Jesus left and practicing it for myself, then it will become imprinted on me. And when it becomes imprinted, that's the place you want to be. To have something imprinted on your heart and mind requires special attention. It takes great care. Paul warned the Thessalonians, note, that's that word, that cause divisions among you and separate from them. When we're watching and noticing, we need to see the imprint that says that's not a good imprint or that is a good imprint, and it takes great care. This imprint that we need to have in our lives is an imprint of a certain doctrine. Romans 6 and 17, Paul said of the Romans, I thank God that you have obeyed from the heart the form, the imprint of doctrine that you were delivered. We have to be people who are willing to be imprinted with the image of Jesus. 2 Corinthians 4, 16 to 18, Paul says that very thing. He says that we're looking to an image into which we are being transformed while we look at that image, while we're being imprinted with it. What I'm saying is this. If you want to be a person who is influenced well and therefore has a reputation that is solid and sound and good, then start today. Find people that you can mimic and copy who are trying to follow Jesus too. And when they're not around, practice for yourself what you've seen, tracing the design they left, following the steps of Jesus. And then allow it to be imprinted in your heart, where people can say when they look at you, I see Jesus. And when people can do that, then we can all know that we have been influenced well. A closing thought. It's the same process to being influenced poorly. Because people who are not the people they need to be began by copying and mimicking someone or something that they should never have done. And it became a part of their lives, and they were practicing it, and they were tracing it, and they were doing it. And now they are imprinted with those very same negative images that they've been following. I can't get away from being influenced. But I can decide who I will learn to be influenced by. Today, Jesus left an image, an imprint in the world that whether people accept it or not, it can't be denied. Has that image influenced you well? Have you decided to give your life to Him? Have you decided that that's how I want to be influenced? Have you decided that's what I want my reputation to be? When you are penitent and willing to be immersed for forgiveness of sins, He imprints His life on you in a beginning way, and then you start the growth process. And maybe the imprint is left, and you're not what you want it to be from the very beginning. Today would be a great time to say, I want to come home. How are you being influenced? I am certain that whenever it began, we started as a group singing what we call an invitation song because of its effect to influence the decision of someone else. If we can help you today, will you meet our shepherds as we stand together?
We hope that you enjoyed today's broadcast, brought to you by the Richmond Church of Christ. We are located at 1500 Lancaster Road in Richmond, Kentucky. We meet at 9 a.m. each Sunday morning for Bible class, followed by our morning worship service held at 10 a.m. Our Sunday evening service is held at 6 p.m. Our midweek Bible study is held on Wednesday at 7 p.m. If you are in the area, we would love to have you as our honored guest. Thanks for listening.